Hey everyone, welcome back to Digital Foundry, specifically Digital Foundry Direct Weekly 117, the Spartan edition, which will have no real Halo news in it whatsoever, unfortunately. But there is lots to discuss, and first of all, joining us, Tom Morgan.
Hello, long time no see. Glad to be back on.
Yep, great to have you here. And of course, John Linneman.
You can't have a 117 episode without a John on here, right? So I had to be here just for it.
We'll try and shoehorn in some Halo content somehow during this direct, but I think there were some sun shadows added to Halo Infinite this week.
So, there you go.
There we go. But that isn't one of our major news topics this week. So let's crack on. Okay, so our first news story of the week. Well, John posted his Final Fantasy 16 review. Massive numbers there. Astonishing response. Brilliant content, John. Really enjoyed it. I just want to talk about some of the points that have been raised and your reaction to the reaction, essentially. I think one of the big things that came out of it was the fact that the performance mode remained unsteady, even though there was talk of a day one patch, which did materialize, but didn't really seem to shift the needle there. Mm-hmm. And one of the headline figures that came out of your review, which has obviously been reacted upon, is the 720p minimum resolution in the performance mode. So break it down for us. What's your take on all of this?
So my feeling is that this doesn't necessarily represent a trend, although we are seeing more 30 frames per second, but I think this is a demonstration of why determining your target frame rate early in development is absolutely critical. And this is completely my hypothesis, but I suspect that they were building this game with 30 frames per second in mind from the beginning, and then went back to try to add in this performance mode later in development. And from speaking with many developers that have focused on frame rate, this feels like the pathway to ruin. Unless you have a tremendous amount of overhead, it's extremely difficult to solve this problem, right? Because all the art and different things about the way the game is built aren't necessarily going to be compatible with that performance target. And I think that's exactly what's happened here. And it's pretty clear that they are struggling to get where they would like on this. And I think, we probably will see this more often, but I think as long as developers are aiming for 60 frames per second from the beginning, I think it's still very feasible that we'll see good quality performance modes in games, right?
Right. Okay. Tom, thoughts on this one?
I think it works for VR displays sometimes if it sneaks in that top window, but not always. Yeah. It's not.
Well, it doesn't work for this, clearly.
Not for this, no.
Actually,
it's a shame.
It's worth mentioning that if this game had been available on the Xbox, this wouldn't have been an issue, because that supports the wider VRR window with low frame rate compensation. But to that same point, it's also possible to fix this on PS5 if they implement a proper LFC mode, like, say, Insomniac did, right? If you do the 120 hertz output with VRR combination, you can achieve exactly the same thing as on the Xbox. It's just that this 60 hertz output with the 48 hertz bottom means that you're dropping out of the VRR range constantly, and it feels terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suspect you're right, John. I believe that this was a game that was created with 30 FPS in mind. And I think the audience needs to understand the whole process there. Essentially when they're testing for performance, or even just, the creation of the assets, it all has a specific render budget in mind. That budget can expand slightly, and that's why you have dynamic resolution scaling, right? So if you exceed your budget, the resolution drops. I think the resolution drops in the quality mode as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It drops to 1080p, I found, for sure.
Right, so it's a sort of 1080p to 1440p window there.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, we're already sort of pushing the boundaries of, getting more out of that render budget by lowering resolution dynamically. So it's pretty clear to me, I think your hypothesis is probably right on the money there, John, that this was primarily designed as a 30 frames per second experience, and possibly the performance mode was added later on. And it's a poor fit because you've got all of this sort of, legacy of development, which was targeting a completely different performance target. So it's not really surprising that this is happening. And that's not to say that you can't have great looking 60 frames per second experiences, but basically the entire development process, the entire art pipeline changes according to that target. Which is set pretty early on in development. So this is why you have games like Call of Duty that look spectacular at 60 frames per second, because they're built from the ground up to do that. Similarly, Doom Eternal, always 60 frames per second on a console was the target there. The question is where the bottlenecks are, and it could be CPU, it could be GPU, right?
I think it's both.
Right. Well, you showed a really specific example, which I found quite intriguing, which is that when you go into the combat mode, suddenly the performance increases.
Yeah.
And, it turns out that they're lowering the resolution still further.
That's the weird thing is, like, I started to notice this because I had the frame rate graph running, testing the game, and you can run away from enemies and they will often chase you. And I found that running across the terrain with enemies in tow yielded better performance. And I'm like, wait a minute, if I explore this world with enemies following me around, it runs better.
With the catch obviously being that it's then a 720p sort of with what we assume is FSR 1, possibly.
It's
still up for debate, isn't it? But it looks like all the signs of it. So yeah, imagine playing the whole game like that, though. That level of image quality.
That is actually my other real issue with it, is this reliance on what seems to be FSR 1, or at least a spatial upscaler that works very similarly. It has all the telltale signs of FSR 1. And again, we don't know the render budget on this stuff, but I feel like that alone is a gigantic mistake for image quality. And I would hope that they would consider another solution, even FSR2, which is significantly better. Although that too seems to break when your resolution gets below a certain threshold. Like 720p with FSR2 is also pretty bad, as we saw in Jedi Survivor. So,
yeah, for sure.
But still, FSR1 is just a bad solution for this. When your pixel counts are that low, it looks horrendous.
Okay, well, I'm going to actually skip to some supporter questions that were scheduled for the end of the show, since we're talking about FSR. This one from Evan. As we see more current gen only games, do you think we will see more forced RTGI consoles? I love the look of RTGI, but not at the cost of sub 720p internal resolutions plagued by FSR artifacts. This doesn't have RTGI, but it does seem to have some raid-facing element in it. For the shadows, or something close to it. This one from Prestonality. After all these recent titles on current gen running sub 4K with less than stellar upscaling methods, I looked back at Xbox One X mid-gen refresh and realized how much better the image quality was back then, as many titles were running 4K native or checkerboard, albeit mostly 30 FPS. Are we doomed to progressively worse and worse image quality now that we have these subpar upscalers like FSR1 and FSR2? Or is this something developers can do to get a better quality image even at a lower frame rate? Interesting questions there. I mean, I think it is possibly the case with this one that we're seeing a performance mode shoehorned in there when it was never really intended to be in there, possibly.
Yeah.
I do think there needs to be some improvement to these upscaling solutions, but I do think we're going to see it, right? Because, across the generation, technologies improve, they get better. Maybe it'll be an offshoot of FSR. Maybe it'll be, something else. Who knows?
Fundamentally, though, I think part of the problem lies with developers sort of using and abusing these technologies beyond what they were intended for, right? Like, I think when AMD developed FSR2 for the PC, I don't think they anticipated people trying to upscale like 720p or below to like, say, 4K, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge ask, and it's just not designed to do that. And as a result, it kind of feels like perhaps some developers are using it as a bit of a magic bullet, right? Where they're like, oh, well, we can just FSR this thing up to 4K, done and done. But they're going beyond what it was really intended to do, or at least what it was intended to do while delivering good image quality.
Yeah, I agree. Thoughts on that one, Tom? I mean, you've got experience with FSR2 in, I guess it was
Cyberpunk.
The Witcher and Cyberpunk, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Cyberpunk for sure. I mean, it doesn't play nice with everything on screen either. Even in the best case, like you get a lot of noise on fences and this sort of thing. So it's not like a magic bullet. I do think it falls on a good base resolution to work with, just as you guys are saying. And I think there's an element of using DRS as like, that'll just sort it if we have this adjust to a bounds and leave it to go down to 66% of the intended resolution, then that'll solve it. But it overlooks the fact that at 66% of say 1440p, it's just not going to have enough pixel data for FSR to reconstruct with. It's a shame because there's actually, is like to take a very protracted example. I spoke to Rebellion about Sniper Elite, which doesn't use FSR, but it's like an example of them saying we wanted it to hit 1080p on Switch, and we were going to get that no matter what. And using DRS in that was seen internally as a bit of a sort of, a cop out. We want to just do it properly because anything below that wouldn't look great. So I think there's definitely a mentality among a lot of developers that DRS in conjunction with FSR 2 or 1 is just the way to get quick results.
I think I'm agreeing with you, John, again, on this concept. I sort of hesitate to call it a crutch, but we're looking at compromises on top of compromises here because, dynamic resolution scaling used to be a method of last resort in order to maintain performance, right? But now it's becoming more generally accepted and used as standard. And it can drop below the target quite significantly. But now we're having FSR2 on top of that. The lower the resolution goes with FSR2, as Tom points out, the less data there is to reconstruct with. So it looks poor. So yes, and I agree with you entirely also that FSR2 probably wasn't designed for this. It was designed primarily for the PC space. And the idea was to increase performance. And it kind of assumes that there's a decent base level of performance to begin with. So yes, more data both in the spatial and temporal realms, because also the higher the frame rate, the better the reconstruction is.
Yep, big time.
Is interesting actually. Cyberpunk Flare showed that very well. Like performance mode and quality mode, the RT mode, kind of run. Actually, the performance mode runs at higher resolutions quite often. But So it's actually
because of the ray tracing, right?
Yeah, ray tracing. So it's like performance mode not only runs at the higher resolution, but also the higher frame rate. So FSR2 just has a wealth of data, double the frame rate and more pixels. So it works very well, better there overall.
So going back to Final Fantasy 16, John, performance mode, do you think it should have been there? If it's that compromised? I mean, I was reading some of the reactions and people were still using it because they just don't want to have 30 and they're not happy with the motion blur. What are your thoughts there?
This whole thing, I almost feel like I couldn't help but feel like I was being gaslit by people. I don't think that's the case, but like this whole, I've never seen such a vicious reaction to motion blur. I can't wrap my head, this really got me thinking about the differences between human perception between different people and also perhaps some other preferences. Like, are they cranking the camera sensitivity up and whipping the camera around all the time? Are the people playing just constantly moving the camera? Are they specifically trying to focus their vision on areas of the image while the camera is rotating? I would love to know it. And I found myself thinking about it as well when I'm just playing the game and my eyes are comfortable. I'm like, what if I try focusing on this part of the image and rotate the camera? And I can't quite get to grips with what people are seeing that's causing issues for them. Right. But I do think 30 frames per second has become more difficult to stomach lately due to the rise of larger, brighter TVs, right?
Okay.
When you think about the old days, right? You're playing 30 FPS or less, like Zelda Ocarina of Time, heralded as one of the greatest games ever made. That game runs at 20 frames per second, but people played it on a CRT smaller CRTs, even the big CRTs, they're not that big, versus say like a gigantic 77-inch OLED or something, right? Where your face is right up there. You got HDR on. That perhaps could impact things as well. Like, I would actually like to do a study on this, on like what determines the sensitivity to certain things. Like, for me, my sensitivity comes entirely from consistency, right? Like, little tiny frame time fluctuations, that is like getting a needle stabbed in the eye. Like, it drives me nuts when there's frame time inconsistencies. I just can't deal with it. Some folks don't seem to mind that, and they just, they want more frames, even if those frames are distributed improperly. So it's I don't know. This whole situation is super weird. The good news though is that Yoshi P did suggest that they are adding in the option to toggle motion blur very soon. So those people that like literally throw up all over their living room when they see motion blur, they will be very happy. That's good.
Yeah, I think a motion blur toggle is always a good thing.
I agree. I actually think there should always be a toggle for that, because it's clear that not everybody can stomach it or enjoys it. So that should always be there. As for whether the performance mode should be there, I think in the end, yeah, because people seem to be happy with it somewhat. Like, for my money, though, I feel like launching with just quality mode would have given the impression of, I think the game is extremely polished except for performance mode, and performance mode existing in the first place is the one and only real blemish with the game. So it makes the game seem slightly less polished than it actually is, just because of the inclusion of this flawed mode, right? So that's why you're kind of like wavering back and forth on whether it should be there or not. Clearly some people are happier using it, but it also makes the game seem less polished than it otherwise would be, right? It's like, what if you launched Uncharted 4 back on the PS4, which was like basically a locked 30 FPS and tons of motion blur, right? You launched that game, it had a performance mode in the single player mode, and it was always like 40 to 50 frames per second. That would have been not good. That would have been a bad experience, and it would have made the game seem less polished than it was. That's kind of what I'm thinking of here.
I'm wondering whether the concept of not launching with a performance mode would have generated a lot of negative publicity at a time where the game didn't need it. Because we do see, Plague Tale came out, and, I really feel sorry for the Asobo guys, because literally until they did release that 60 frames per second mode, literally every post about a Plague Tale that turned up on Twitter was accompanied by replies that said 60 FPS when. I also wonder, you're talking about being gaslit there, John. I still contend that Twitter is a microcosm of actual
right, but it's not
sentiment.
just Twitter. I've seen people writing whole threads and like comments on like, is 30 frames per second an accessibility issue? No. I think it is. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what happened to people?
They would not have coped growing up with PS1 or N64, that's for sure.
That's what got me thinking about the display size thing and the display technology, and how maybe that has influenced the way people perceive these images. It's super weird, but at the same time, this game hit at just the right time, where if it only had 30 FPS, I think it would have been okay, because it's kind of like canceling each other out, where you have Starfield with the 30 FPS announcement, you have Final Fantasy 16. If it had been 30 FPS only, suddenly the console warriors, there's no ground to stand on anymore, because both of their big games are 30 FPS. So what are they going to do? They can't say, oh, well, your game, you know what I mean? Like it cancels out, and bam, the argument goes away.
That's my question for you. So at the recent FTC sort of hearings that are happening, well, it was last night as we record this, Microsoft once again indicated that we're looking at a new generation of consoles in 2028, and they've also effectively ruled out mid-generation refresh machines at this point. When we're looking at sort of games hitting these technical limitations so early on in the generation, I mean, do you think these consoles will have the legs to survive until 2028?
Yes. I mean, clearly,
it was a loaded question, by the way.
It is. I know. Like, rammed in there. I think they will. Yeah. I think there's just time, and like Final Fantasy 16 is a great example of it. Dedicated development. even if the performance mode isn't there, but if we see more of that and move away from last gen sort of a division of focus, then we're going to get closer to where we want to go eventually. But I think developers are still getting used to the ins and outs of this hardware, which is why like the principle of a mid-gen refresh actually kind of frustrates me. But that's another story, I think.
Let's be honest here, though. There are still games being made for Xbox One, right?
Yeah.
And furthermore, the Switch is still a juggernaut, right? And that thing is nowhere near equivalent to the current consoles. Any issues with performance on modern consoles is a development decision, I would say. You're either targeting this frame rate or you're not, right? And if a game fails to reach its target frame rate, I would say it's no longer the fault of the hardware. It is a development failure.
We're not looking at a PlayStation 3. Like it's not that situation.
Even on PS3 though, 60 FPS was still a design decision. And when you look back, the games that were like, you know what, we're going to do more simplified old school visuals, but we're going to go for 1080p at 60 FPS. Those games hold up a whole lot better than those big AAA Western titles that are like, yeah, let's just do all these crazy things and it's going to run it at 540p with nonstop screen tearing at 20 frames per second. Those games do not hold up at all.
Mm-hmm. I think this has been a generation quite unlike any other because, essentially now we're in 2023, 2.5 years after the launch of the consoles. And it's only now that we're starting to see games that actually have been explicitly targeting the new generation, haven't had to contend with the last ones as well, which is kind of why we had those 60 FPS modes that were so commonplace, right? Because the games were fundamentally designed for older hardware. As we move into this generation, being with the developers targeting this hardware specifically, we're going to be seeing a lot more of a sort of traditional spread between 30 and 60 FPS games. And I think we kind of just have to accept that. And I think also the 40 FPS within a 120 hertz container should be more readily embraced.
It's so underutilized. It's maddening. I don't get it.
Makes a big, big difference. I think that's all we've really got to say about this one at the moment. My feeling, I really, really, really enjoyed the game. If you couldn't tell from the video, my game clock is it's almost 80 hours at this point. Although to be fair, that's partially due to leaving the game on while doing work on it, right? You turn it on, get a pickup shot, and it just sits there. But I played through it. I freaking love this game. I think it's really well done. It's a little on the easy side, but the experience is extremely rewarding and fun, and it feels like a return to form for Square in general, especially after fumbling Forspoken, which I really did not like very much. I thought Forspoken was not well made and has a lot of problems. This is significantly better, and I think it's worth playing. And also, awesome sound experience. I felt taken care of as a home theater user. Right, there was some serious LFE going on. You had a lot of bass in there, good surround sound. The music and the sound and everything is just awesome. It's really great. It's a good experience. Mm-hmm, absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to our next news topic. So this one is really interesting. The summer of video events came to a conclusion with Nintendo releasing its own Direct. Big bunch of games in there, and wow, where do we begin? John, let's start at the end of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Super Mario Wonder. This was looking fantastic, right?
I had heard rumors of a 2D Mario for a while now. And, I'm like, okay, whatever. I love 2D Mario, but I really wasn't sure what they were going to do next. And this to me looks wonderful, if you will. I really like the direction they're going with this game because... So the new Super Mario Brothers series, they are well-made games, but they lacked a soul, if you will. They felt there was something off about them that never felt right, and it always seemed to be trying to recapture that Super Mario Brothers 1 feel,
Yeah.
Where this one is like, well, what if we take the 2D Mario concept and just do weird, unexpected things? And that's what Mario used to be about, right? That's what Mario games were. You would discover weird, unusual things. Every game had these memorable things in them that kept it fresh. And that feels like kind of what they've done here. So like there's this, I don't even know how to describe it, where it's like an alternate dimension or some kind of thing where stuff is just warping and twisting and changing all around you. There's mechanics that we've not really seen before in Mario games, like the herds, you know, rolling around in like a spike ball down an almost Sonic-like obstacle course. Just the behavior of enemies, the talking flowers. All of this seems really, really interesting. And I'm very curious to see where it goes. And also the music in the trailer was really good, which is the new Super Mario Brothers games failed on that. The music was actively bad, I would say. And I think good music is a prerequisite. It was a choice, but it was a bad choice. It sounded terrible. I hated that music. And I think
you didn't like ba ba.
None of it. The tracks themselves just weren't good. And I think that's a failing for a platform game. It needs really good music to be at its best. And they failed on that front. And I think they got it here. If this is anything to go by.
The style reminds me, thinking about it, a little bit. It's a little bit closer to the Mario movie in terms of the glossiness and the effects behind it. Just a little bit closer to that style rather than the very clinical, synthetic look of the new Super Mario Brothers games on Wii and Wii U. But you're right. It looks like also in tandem with that, like a return to the style of even Mario Brothers 3, with kind of like that was always set to the theme of you're on a stage and everything's set on like a theater stage with silhouettes behind you and things like that. And they've got a lot of interplay with light like that. I really enjoyed this bit in the trailer where Mario is like all in silhouette, all in pitch black, and he kind of extends upwards, and that kind of becomes part of the levels mechanic. Really inventive. As always with Nintendo, they try to think a little bit. I think with the new Super Mario Brothers series, they kind of set on a formula which was very un-Nintendo. Like, it was like, oh, we found this, we can almost churn out levels, we can even give people a level editor in a Mario Maker, which looks very similar to what we're getting in New Super Mario Brothers levels. Sure. So it's nice to see something so stylized and sort of bespoke, if we're going to use a favorite word, that we can actually see. There's no way users can make levels like this. This is handcrafted by people who are like experts in this field. So yeah, very impressed by that one. Very much looking forward to it.
The other thing that stood out to me about it was they seem to use decimated animation for some of the frames, right? So I think looking closely, my first thought was that they're using sprites, but I do think they're actually 3D models. But unlike those new Super Mario Brothers games, they don't seem to interpolate between every frame. So it gives it an almost sprite-like response.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really smart choice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My take on it is that, yeah, you're right, John. There was something lacking with new Super Mario Brothers. And essentially it was that it didn't really have its own identity. And there was a lack of wonder and surprise. So I think this is basically an attempt to address that. And I just think it looks phenomenal. And again, the concept that it's allegedly running on, 2015 mobile chipset is absolutely phenomenal.
You say that, but the thing about the visuals that it really reminded me of is Rayman Origins and Legends, if you recall. Mm-hmm. And those games ran at anything 1080p 60 on PS3 and Xbox 360. They ran at native res at 60 FPS on the PS Vita.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of this type of like wild stretching and squashing and animation stuff going on that reminded me a lot of that, which is a great thing because those games are beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Lots of amazing looking new games in there. There was quite a focus on a remake of the DS Luigi title?
Which one?
Luigi.
You mean Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon?
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, the 3DS game.
Mm-hmm. That was looking great.
What a weird thing though, because like, so Luigi Mansion, the first one, was remade for 3DS, and then they made Dark Moon for 3DS as well, or possibly first, and then Luigi Mansion 3 came to Switch, and now they're like, well, let's go back to the second one, which was actually my least favorite of the three, and remake it for Switch. And I don't fully get why. Thought that was a weird decision. Like, why? Sure, why not? I guess, but still, it's a little bit strange.
A new remake of Super Mario RPG.
That one is nuts.
Interesting.
Because people have been. Did you see that? That looks amazing, right, Tom?
Yeah. I thought it was I mean, the whole show in general, like, it had this theme of what's old is new. This was like one of many games I think we're going to touch on, but it was like there's so many approaches you can take to reinvigorating an old idea, bringing it back, and presenting it with modern visuals. And this one was like, hey, I mean, I don't know how popular Super Mario RPG was back in the day. It was, it was a big collaboration, obviously, between Squaresoft and Nintendo. A very rare sort of partnership, but it was...
No, they were doing Donkey Kong Country.
They were doing Donkey Kong Country as well.
No, I mean, you said a very rare partnership.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry. Your punnery is getting out of hand. Anyway, carry on, Tom.
Yeah, anyway, the trailer looks like it takes some of the concept art from the original game, because some of the stuff you saw in Mario RPG had some beautiful backdrops, all pre-rendered. But it was also like there's so much detail packed in. It was almost limited by the sprite work. I mean, the resolution of those backdrop assets. So to see them almost reinterpreted and brought to life in full 3D, you can see stuff like there's a shot on Twitter. I'm sure we can pull it up of a Princess Peach in a box with all these characters from other Nintendo franchises. There's Samus. Yeah, there's stuff like that, and it's like, oh, there's the Stunt FX cars, and it's like, oh, now we can see them, they're there. So I think this is a really good way to go, and it's all kind of styled. I mean, it's so faithfully designed that you can see that they are a one-to-one match if you overlay them, the backdrops. And even the gameplay style is like you run in cardinal directions as if you're running using a Super NES D-pad. It's like this way, this way, this way, this way. So it's very much like, the template is exactly the same. They've just boosted the visuals and brought it up to speed. Not that I minded the old style, to be honest. It looks great, but it's a good way to bring it to a new generation.
Yeah. I want to say, I think this is a game that has been hotly demanded by fans of Super Mario RPG for many years. I've seen a lot of clamoring for this, almost as much as Mother 3, in fact. But I actually think the original has aged. I hate saying that a game has aged poorly, but in this case, I will say that because it's part of that trend to push for CGI rendered visuals that started by Rare, basically. And a lot of those I feel don't actually look that great anymore because the actual renders themselves are extremely basic and not that attractive compared to, say, like hand-drawn pixel art of the era. This has a completely modern look to it while still deriving its themes from that original CG, right? Like, this does not look like 90s CG, but it definitely has the spirit of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think that's pretty cool. And I think this is one of those games that hasn't been that widely available for a long time. So returning to it with visuals like this is a really smart move, and I think people will really like it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There was the reveal of a Arkham trilogy coming to Switch. Actually, we'll bring in some supporter questions on this.
Oh boy.
This one from Austin Pridgeon. Hey everyone, I know the Nintendo Direct had so many good games to talk about, but am I alone in thinking Arkham Knight actually looked good on Switch? I know it's an older game, but it seems to look on par with the original console versions. Also, could this lead to PS5 series versions or PC patch for Arkham Knight that lets it run at 60 FPS without using brute force? This one from Who the Hell Am I? With Arkham Knight being announced for Switch, are we looking at another quote-unquote impossible port? Realistically, what kind of performance do you think we should expect? And can we expect a video on these games when they come out? Do I have to bribe someone? Well, there's obviously a lot of interest in this collection, and we will be covering it. Wow, where do we start on this one? I mean, obviously, Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, they were originally designed for PS3 and 360, right? So the Switch should be able to handle those.
Should be.
With relative ease. Arkham Knight was obviously a pretty demanding game for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox One when it came out.
PlayStation 4.
So, yeah, I did see some compromises to detail there. It seemed to be all right. They showed a bit of the Batmobile section, which was the performance hotspot, really, for Arkham Knight.
It was.
Looked all right. Thoughts on this one, Tom?
I'm as surprised as anyone to see it, actually, to such a point that I immediately jumped to, they might be using cloud streaming for this one. The really pessimistic thought. But actually, it looked great from the trailer. And the credentials behind the developer working on the port, I forget their name, but they worked on Borderlands Legendary Collection and the Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 HD remaster on Switch. Those ports were handled by them. They do things by, rendering on hardware and no cloud streaming, so intrigued. But as you say, it's those Batmobile sections. The move to open world in Arkham Knight was marked by quite a few troubles, I think more so on PC. That was very much like...
To be fair, Tom, Arkham City was also open world. It was open world in the same way, right? They just added the Batmobile, basically.
But added the Batmobile, and... this felt more physics-based as well with Arkham Knight. So Batmobile, fast asset streaming through streets, lots of stuff sort of billowing and being hit. So I suppose they could remove a lot of those elements and that'd help switch along, being more CPU limited, but it's a challenge. And I love to see developers rise to these impossible port challenges to see, we've seen amazing things with Witcher. That's the go-to. Very much. And, I don't have any question about Asylum or City. They were, even on Wii U, City was on Wii U, so no questions about those. But what resolution and how this one will run is another question.
Yeah, the CPU side of things and the streaming things is going to be the challenge on that one. Did you have any perceptions on this one you want to share, John?
Yeah, so Tom, you say you have no concerns over those first two games, but I actually do have some questions on them.
Oh.
First of all, I assume that they will be targeting the original releases, because if you recall, there was that Batman Arkham collection, which was atrocious. The one capped at 45 frames per second, where it was some sort of like Unreal Engine 4 conversion that was not well done. I suspect they won't be using that. That makes sense. But then, we don't see that many Unreal Engine 3 derived games on the Switch. I assume there have been some. I guess Borderlands was Unreal Engine 3 based, right? So, and these guys worked on that, as you say. So that bodes well.
And Tony Hawk's.
Tony Hawk was Unreal Engine 4. So, but I'm really curious to see how this turns out, because like you
I think we all are.
Like Arkham Knight, especially though, that game was really pushing the visual envelope at the time, to the point where I'm actually skeptical about it holding up on Switch. I mean, I guess we'll see. Do we even know if the footage in that trailer was actually Switch footage? I mean, Nintendo is usually good about that, but...
It looked different. It looked pared back to me, but...
I immediately assumed it wasn't.
The motion blur's there, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see, won't we?
I enjoyed that little wink from you, John.
That question... from Austin there about whether we're going to be seeing PS5 and Series versions.
Doubt it.
We've got to see them, right? Because, you can play them on back compat and they're fine. It irons out the issues that the originals had below 30 frames per second. But, the anti-aliasing is still poor. The game looks spectacular at higher resolutions. As we see on the PC version, there have been patches made for the Arkham Knight on PC, which does improve performance there. I think they could just bring that game out tomorrow and it would sell millions again.
Yeah, I think Arkham City looks so good even now that you just put that out right now and it competes with PS5 and Series X games visually. Like, no joke, it's that good.
Arkham Knight, I presume.
Arkham Knight specifically, not the original two, but Arkham Knight.
Arkham City would be a different.
Oh yeah, that's much more dated, but Arkham Knight is looks stunning, fine. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
It felt like wizardry when it first launched, right? Like, it was just, I could not believe that we were seeing that on those consoles at the time. It just looked unlike anything else that had been made. It was really impressive. That's why the whole, what is it, the Suicide Squad stuff is bumming me out, right? aside from the game changing so dramatically, like the visuals are nowhere near Arkham Knight. So it's just I'm completely baffled by that.
Where do we want to go next with the Direct? Penny's Big Breakaway is the first title from the Sonic Mania guys, which you're particularly excited about, right, John?
Yeah, because fundamentally, these guys understand momentum-driven platform games, right? They did a fantastic job with Sonic Mania working alongside Sega. And then they formed Evening Star, and they are building this new game out using their Star engine. And this is the first game that they've made that's entirely 3D gameplay based. And I think it looks really fun. The character is very odd, I will say. Not what I expected, but the core mechanics look like a ton of fun. The yo-yo, the momentum stuff, like just the speed of it all. It looks like it could be a great game. I love the visual design. T. Lopes is doing the music again, like he did for Sonic Mania, which is great.
Great.
There's just a lot going on here, and because of their track record, I have zero concerns about the gameplay here. I think it's just going to be a phenomenal experience.
Should we stick with Sonic or Sonic adjacent stuff with Sonic Superstars?
Sure, why not?
We got our first look at the Switch version. It seems to be running at 60 frames per second.
That's right.
It did seem to be struggling a bit with the 4-player co-op, based on what I saw, but looking good.
I'm actually a little bit confused about this now, because when we first saw it, we were thinking, oh, this must be a Hedgehog engine game. But then, it's revealed that Arzest is doing a lot of the work on it, which is Naoto Oshima's studio, one of the Sonic creators, the original designer of Sonic, actually. And they have more of a track record in working with Unreal Engine, and I'm not sure that Sega is cool with external developers using Hedgehog engine either.
Right.
Which made me wonder, maybe this is actually just Unreal again. And if so, getting a 3D platform game on the Switch running at 60 frames per second that's a big deal. It's an impressive accomplishment, I would say.
Yeah.
But you can definitely tell it's been pared way back. Like the depth of field is gone. The textures are like quarter resolution. Like just the lighting and the fidelity's been stripped way back. But still, the art design shines through, and it's still a nice looking game.
Yeah, for sure.
My concerns with this game remain the level design. Like, it was revealed that they're basically using like the physics that were developed for Sonic Mania, right? So that should be good. But I'm worried about the level design and how it's designed to handle 4 players at once. Because anybody that's played like Sonic 2, where the second player controls Tails, right? Tails is just always falling off the screen. So they're going to have to design the levels in a way that doesn't cause other players to get lost immediately.
Yeah, it doesn't translate, does it? I see this almost as positioned like a new Super Mario Brothers for Sonic, where there's an adjacent, like a parallel series for 3D, like with Sonic Frontiers.
Right.
That's how they seem to have positioned it. And if that's the case, they're almost mimicking what they did with New Super Mario Brothers. And they had a smart design, and because of the pace of Mario, it's kind of like you move at such a pace, it's not a big deal, and you stay within screen bounds. But Sonic is a whole different beast. It's I was assuming they'd go split screen or something for their 4-player, but if it's all within one screen, it's going to be very difficult to manage.
I will say this, though. It's pretty exciting to me personally that we are receiving both a new 2D Sonic and 2D Mario game this fall at the same time. That's pretty awesome.
Okay. Well, we're running way over time here. John, there's a couple of other titles you wanted to talk about.
Just to mention real quick, they're remaking Star Ocean 2. Which looks fantastic. That looks
fantastic, yeah.
Like, they're doing all kinds of crazy lighting effects on the sprites, like sort of this rim lighting and shadowing to really like integrate them into the environment. It's a really nice, faithful way to bring that game back, because it's one of the best Star Ocean games. It's really, really awesome. So I'm happy to see that. Let's see here. Another one that was announced is Otogi Katsugeki Mameda no Bakeru Oracle Saitoru no Sainan. Which is a mouthful, but that is a game being done by Goodfeel, and some ex-Goemon or ex-Konami people, I guess, are working on it. and it resembles the Goemon games. If I don't know, are you guys familiar with that Goemon?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, back from the Super NES days.
Those games are awesome. They were really, really fun. There's a ton of them as well, and it's kind of been absent for a long time. And this game was only shown on the Japanese Direct, so I don't know if it'll come to the West, hopefully, but it just looks awesome. It kind of brings that style forward. You know, they showed sort of 3D platforming action stuff with that sort of style behind it, so I'm excited for that. Beyond that, though, I mean, not too much else, I guess, to say. I mean, they announced Pikmin 1 and 2 being released, which is cool, I guess. They showed Pikmin 4, which is Unreal Engine based now, it seems, which is also interesting. But it looks good. I'm sure that'll be nice. Not too much more. That Vampire Survivors, which not really my thing, but I know people love it. And it seemed to be struggling to run well in that trailer, which is funny.
Yeah.
I think it always struggles to run well. It's one of those games that builds and builds. So no matter what hardware you got, it's kind of, it'll get to a point where it breaks.
So we got this interesting question here from Neomorph. Hi there, team. From all the great new game announcements we saw at the Direct, do you expect Nintendo to support the Switch into 2024 and beyond? Or will these first-party games be its swan song before it announces/releases the Switch 2 or whatever they're cooking up? Thank you and keep up the amazing work. I think from my perspective, it was... it kind of showed business as usual with Nintendo, regardless of whether there's a new hardware coming along or not. And the other thing it sort of highlighted to me is that, you know, you can have great games that aren't pushing the state of the art in technology.
Oh, yeah.
And they're still great games, right? That said, you know, some of the stuff, the Nintendo first party stuff was looking really, really special. And you can't help but wonder what they would look like on a more powerful machine.
Well, for Zelda, yeah. Right, but for something like Super Mario Brothers Wonder, I suspect it would look exactly the same, just maybe higher res. Right, like
great.
That game is designed with a very specific visual aesthetic, and that's what it delivers, and it delivers it at 60 frames per second. I mean, there's not much more you could want from that. It basically looks like perfect.
I mean, it was a great Direct, I thought. What can I say?
There's crammed full of stuff. I mean, it's and to the point in Switch, it feels like every year we're asking, you know, is this the final year? Even with Zelda coming up, we thought maybe that'd be a cross-gen with the new platform, but it seems like Nintendo are very determined to and very happy to just stick with what they've got. But I really hope by 2024 we'll be having a different conversation about this because, you know, new hardware is exciting. I love to see it.
I'm super curious to see their strategy for revealing it at this point because it's a very different Nintendo these days on the management side. So.
Absolutely. That's all we've really got to say about Nintendo Direct, but yeah, absolutely fantastic show, and it sort of capped some really strong presentations this summer. But let's move on to the next news topic. Yeah, we're not going to be talking about the FTC stuff with Microsoft that much, but certainly of more relevance in the here and now to the user is the fact that in a range of territories, Xbox Series X console prices have risen.
Oh boy.
Game Pass subscription costs are also going up. So the price increases on Series X effectively bring it into line with the price increases that Sony made. I suspect a lot of that may be down to currency fluctuations. But it's not good news that after 2.5 years at a set price point where you'd start to be expecting to see console prices to be coming down, we're just not seeing it. And in actual fact, Microsoft is putting out a Series S 1 terabyte SKU, which is going to be $349. So, you know, the price is going up on that console, albeit with a value increase via a storage boost. Tom, what do you make of this?
Well, it just as you say, it's unusual, and it's around this time where you'd expect maybe whisperings of a hardware revision to bring price down, and maybe within like year 4 you get it. But here I wonder if there's part limitations, issues with getting developing parts for these consoles has a part to play as well as the inflation. But it's a shame because it does mean a £30 extra on top of what it was priced originally.
Yeah, I think in the UK the price is going up by about 6 to 7%. Price is going up 10% in Europe, which is
Crikey.
phenomenal. Yeah, it's not great. The question is whether Microsoft is still actually taking a loss on the consoles. A while back, Sony said they're actually in profit on the PlayStation 5, but I have dug into this, and it turns out that the accounting practices of PlayStation and Microsoft are somewhat different. So they're likely in similar boats. The difference being that I guess PlayStation 5 versus Series X is actually a simpler machine to put together. What do you make of this, John? These are sort of unprecedented times, really, and unprecedented behavior for what happens a couple of years into a console generation.
Yeah, it really makes you think about like what it took to get these to the market in the first place in 2020,
Yes.
right? And like how close to the edge they were with this stuff. I was also wondering, you mentioned the 349 1 terabyte Series S. You think they're going to phase out the 500 gigabyte Series S?
I think they can only do that if they can get a 299 product out there. Maybe
But
they can. Maybe there's a bundling deal. Maybe there's
that was the
something
thing,
they can
though,
do.
is like if they phase it out, then they've effectively introduced a price increase, right? Without actually saying that. So
I think it would be
that would be bad.
suicidal
That would
to
be
do that.
bad. Either way, though, I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot of factors in this that are driving up costs for these companies, whether it's currency fluctuations or, part supplies, part costs, all these things together.
Yeah.
It's not good. Like these companies don't. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have heard anecdotal evidence that, components that were cents to buy, pre-launch are now 10 times the cost. There's a lot going on there in terms of the supply chains and whatnot. Even now, even when you'd think things have been normalized. I mean, I guess the silicon cost will be starting to come down.
You'd hope.
But you'd hope. But even so, I think the bottom line is that if Microsoft could actually increase market share, reducing price would be one strategy to achieve that. And they can't do it. They've got to do the opposite. It also, again, puts into perspective what's happening in the PC space with graphics cards specifically, where we're seeing some, not great things in terms of price versus performance gen on gen. I don't really know what we can really add about this. The question is, is it coming at the expense of their profit margins? Are they trying to bolster their profits? Are costs being directly moved on to the user? Is it simply the fact that they can't absorb price cuts the profit losses on each unit any further? I think what really sort of frustrates me about this is the lack of transparency about why it's happening.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's the same thing with, what happened with NVIDIA 40 series, where, Jensen basically made a statement that the days of getting a price cut and a gen-on-gen massive bump to performance are over. And it was kind of delivered as a, that's the way it is, suck it. As opposed to
an evil villain in his lair.
Yeah, as opposed to delivering a nuanced discussion on the cost of semiconductors and, 5 nanometer wafers. It's there's a lot going on here, but keeping the user in the dark about why this is happening, I think it's fundamentally fundamentally a bad strategy, and it's also kind of non-Microsoft because they're usually quite open about this. I mean, the discussion we had, we talk about it all the time, John, the discussion we had with Microsoft in 2020 about why they were making Series S is a level of transparency I've never experienced with a console manufacturer before.
I saw some people kind of misunderstood that discussion last week as well, and maybe weren't that super clear on that, but it wasn't, I don't think we were suggesting that they were that they were only planning a Series S as like the main console, right? It was more a theoretical thing on the cost of parts and all that, as you got into.
Absolutely, yeah. It was kind of weird, but this is kind of like the YouTube clip, the curse of the YouTube clip function, where you just cut out the bit that upsets you.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The bit afterwards, which is clarification, doesn't get into the clip.
Exactly. Every time, man, they love doing that.
Obviously it's not great. I'm also curious as to why the PC Game Pass isn't increasing and Xbox is. I thought it was one and the same, right? If you subscribed to PC Game Pass, you got Xbox as well, and vice versa.
I think that's the ultimate plan. It's like that.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Where you can, I think you can just subscribe to PC Game Pass or just regular Xbox Game Pass, but the ultimate gives you everything.
Right. I suppose one reading of it is that the Game Pass was one way Microsoft offset the costs of the hardware that they'd charge for the user, whereas PC, you build it for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider the price of a console, you can't consider the price of the console on its own. It's going to be offset by the amount of games that are typically bought by a user, because Microsoft gets a cut on every single game that arrives on its platform.
Exactly, yeah.
And also subscription costs, as you say, that all goes into a big bucket, and then they kind of figure out how much money they can afford to lose per console. And then the idea is that a couple of years on into the generation, they're actually starting to make money on the consoles as well. But obviously something's gone amiss with this generation, because prices are having to go up.
And that's what makes the whole idea of a mid-gen refresh even more confusing at this point, right? Like, I don't see how...
A mid-gen upgrade, I think, is probably the better word. I'm sure there will be a refresh, right? Because at some point...
an upgrade.
It just makes sense to produce. It is more cost efficient to produce a slim console for many reasons.
Yes, I believe that'll happen. But Microsoft's effectively ruled out a mid-gen upgrade, but Sony has not. And I struggle to see the path to releasing a product like that at a price point that makes sense. Because if they really wanted to pull it off, you would imagine that the new machine would come in at whatever the PS5's priced at now. And then the regular PS5 then would reduce in price. But if they've had to increase the price of the PS5, I don't think they can afford to just drop that down, right? So this creates a pretty big issue, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not great news, really, but, I would have liked to have seen a bit more transparency as to why it's happening. Okay, let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, so there was a report this week from Video Cards where essentially they were trying to get to the bottom of an issue that's affecting a lot of PC releases recently, and it's problematic, right? Titles like Jedi Survivor, Callisto Protocol are arriving on the market, and they're AMD-sponsored titles, and they have no support for any other internal upscaler other than FSR2, which, if we're looking at the sort of hierarchy of quality on upscaling solutions, generally DLSS sits at the top. XeSS, I'd say that good implementations are better than FSR2, but then you have FSR2 at the bottom, which is a solution that works for all GPUs, right? Which is a great thing. But ultimately, if you're only supporting FSR2, that means that better options that are available are not making their way into key games like Jedi Survivor 2, Resident Evil 4 Remake, etc. And we're seeing hacks, specifically for Resident Evil 4, where DLSS is being injected in favor of FSR2, and we're getting, by and large, superior results. And this report from Video Cards, they're attempting to ascertain whether AMD sponsorship means that AMD is mandating that you can't have those other upscalers in an AMD sponsored titles. And they don't deny it, I think, is the best way to phrase it based on this report. Whereas NVIDIA has come out with a very strong statement that says they don't care, right? If a developer wants to put FSR2 into a game, then have at it. John, I'm going to come to you on this one because it is frustrating. I mean, you're a pretty committed PC gamer for specific titles, and
increasingly so.
Yeah, but when you're getting a game like Jedi Survivor and there is no DLSS support and the implementation isn't great, this is the wrong policy, right? I don't understand why AMD are doing it. And to be clear, my personal opinion is that, particularly for games that are built on Unreal Engine, where ready-made DLSS and XeSS plugins are available, purposefully not using those technologies is a bad look for the game. Also, I'd say it's a bad look for AMD because, basically you're not going to make people come over to your platform by, reducing available features in a system that's defined by its customization and options.
Exactly. It's a little bit surprising, to be honest, because I feel like in the larger gaming space, AMD has kind of become the people's champion, while NVIDIA is seen as this big bad empire, right? And yet when you actually look at the practices here in terms of how it impacts users, I think AMD is, by not denying that, they're pretty much suggesting that they're taking an almost, dare I say, console war-like approach. Because, I mean, Sony and Microsoft definitely do this kind of stuff, right? It just sucks to see it in the PC area as well. And yeah, I don't think this is an implementation issue either. Implementing DLSS, like in Unreal Engine, for instance, it's extremely easy to implement DLSS. Even I've experimented with it in my little demos and got it to work. Like, it's not a big deal. It's probably easier for the developer to include it versus the modders putting it in there, right?
So, I mean, we're seeing homebrew projects out there with DLSS being implemented. Yeah. Because, the SDK is out there.
NVIDIA made this very, very, very easy to do. It's as simple as you could want. And it works, as Jensen would say. But, it's some of the games on here I have played on the PC, including, I embarrassingly admitted that I played Far Cry 6. And I actually had an okay time. But the lack of DLSS was a real bummer because the image quality certainly suffered. Also, the ray tracing was anemic in there as well, which is another thing that's often true with these AMD-sponsored titles, right? I think we've found on average, the AMD-specific titles tend to not focus as much on high-end ray tracing features, which is also disappointing. I just don't like this. Although looking at the list that they have here, it did also jump out to me that Halo Infinite, even though it's AMD sponsored, has none of these features, has no FSR2 or DLSS or XESS. It's just their god-awful TAA. Like, it's so bad. It's one of the worst. I don't understand why they have not allowed users to change this, because it's ruining the image quality in that game. Like, to get decent image quality in Halo Infinite, you've got to, like, massively super sample it. Like, I set my render res way above 4K, and thankfully it runs okay on this system. Not that everybody has that luxury, but that was the only way to get decent image quality in there. So the game ends up suffering, and it's true on the Xbox version as well. Like, it should look better than it does, and the TAA kind of ruins the image.
Yeah, I do wonder how this is all going to eventually play out. I mean, when we spoke to Tom Peterson at Intel back when I visited Alex in Berlin, his general outlook was that essentially it's going to be sort of consolidated into some sort of DirectX technology that will automatically route you through to whatever the best upscaling solution is for your particular hardware.
I like that.
Yeah, which would be the way forward, I think. But, there's some interesting stuff that's also happening with NVIDIA where they're asking for specific inputs for DLSS, which may not even be used, but could be used in future for improved quality boosts. So, there's a lot going on there with DLSS. And obviously, there's still going to be improvements for FSR2 happening, being rolled out. The issue is that it shouldn't be the case that a sponsorship disadvantages a particular group of users. And in the case of this particular strategy, it's disadvantaging basically, users that have got, NVIDIA hardware, which is the majority of the user base.
Yeah. The thing I find most funny about this is looking at the list and the drop-off of DLSS support. It's clear, like, NVIDIA's more than happy to include FSR in all of their sponsored games, because they know they've got the better.
To be fair,
technology.
It's not as if NVIDIA doesn't have a history of proprietary.
Oh, they absolutely did.
Shenanigans. Right. I think what's happening here is that they're so confident in DLSS that they don't mind if those other options are in there, simply because DLSS has achieved, critical mass in that particular area of technology. It's the de facto standard in terms of best quality, if you see what I mean. So, if there is the perception that the other options aren't quite as good, they don't really mind if it's in there. Obviously, it's a different situation with AMD, but ultimately, if you're putting out products out there which are specifically disadvantaging other PC users, that's problematic. And I think it actually reflects badly on AMD, and it's not going to make people suddenly think, I need an AMD GPU. You know, it's ultimately counterproductive to AMD as well. Yeah, not great. Let's move on to the next news topic. Final one, just quickly. It looks as though Quake 2 Remastered has been rated. We've got no details on this whatsoever. It's just received a rating by, as usual, South Korea's Game Rating and Administration Committee, which has basically leaked a ton of games at this point.
They're great about that.
Handy for us.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a kind of wish list that we want from this one, right, John? Specifically that Night Dive Studios are on it, just as they were on the first Quake Remastered. But beyond that, what do you want from this game?
I would love like a serious split screen mode. Like imagine that. Like that would be fun with friends, because this, you know, Quake 2 is a classic arena shooter, and it's it would be good that way. Proper internet support would be good as well. You know, obviously I would have loved to have seen ray tracing features in the consoles.
Yeah, that's my first thought,
you know,
as well.
Quake 2 RTX, amazing, but they ain't doing Quake 2 RTX on these machines. Not super smoothly anyway. I would hope that they would support 4K 120 hertz at least. That would make sense and be nice.
Quake Remastered did that. Shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it will be a problem. But it's good that it should be available again, because it's been a while, and Quake 2 is still an interesting and fun game. There was that extremely bizarre Xbox 360 version that I covered many, many years ago.
That was weird, right?
Yeah, that one inadvertently, I was testing it and I was like, wait a minute, it's outputting 1080p. But it was available at launch before the system really seemingly supported 1080p. I can't remember if 1080p was possible over component video or not. I don't think.
No, not at launch, I don't think.
Not at launch. And
it was 1080i. There would have been advantages by playing it on a 1080i output.
That's true. But what I discovered from that game is that it seems to support arbitrary resolutions defined by the Xbox 360's OS, right? So the 360 supports all these oddball resolutions, especially if you use the VGA adapter, right?
Yeah.
It was very awesome of Microsoft. It's one of the best things they ever did, was like the 360 just gives you whatever resolution you want for your display, just like a PC, really. And Quake 2 supported all those resolutions natively. So if you wanted like 1280 by 1024 or something, or I think it was supported, you got it. You get 1080p, you get all these weird things. It would just natively render the pixels at whatever res it detected from the OS level, which was cool.
Fantastic. I guess we just need to wait for details on this. I mean, QuakeCon is coming. Hopefully there'll be something revealed
QuakeCon. Yeah. Dude, that was so fun when we did that video playing Quake Deathmatch, though. Well, maybe we can do that again for Quake 2.
Absolutely, yeah. It could be an interesting way to test the different versions, as I believe Quake 1 Remastered, in actual fact, could actually run... It was crossplay, right?
It was crossplay.
Fantastic.
I propose we team up against Alex again.
Fair enough. Okay, that's the end of the news for this week. Let's move on straight to supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week we ask our supporters on Patreon to put forward a bunch of questions for consideration, and we choose the ones that we're kind of best equipped to answer, or typically I choose ones which will wind up other members of the panel. Not so much this week. Let's take this question from Paul Trainer. It's very, very quick. Hey DF, exclamation point. How feasible would it be for graphics card manufacturers to allow for expandable RAM? Buy new cards to get the latest hardware rendering features, then upgrade memory as the generation goes on. Cheers, guys! Exclamation point. I think in theory it's doable. The question is there you lose performance by having socketed memory, which is not what they want.
Right.
It would be great to have, expandable memory on a GPU.
If I saw this question ahead of time, I would have brought my AW32, the Sound Blaster AW32 with the expandable RAM slots. You remember those, right? The old
Yep.
sound cards, they're these long ISA cards, and you actually have 2 RAM slots on there, so you can increase the available MIDI banks, so you can use nice big chunky sound fonts. I love those cards. I would look.
Wow.
I think that would be funny to see that return, but like you say, I don't think the performance is there for expandable RAM sticks on a GPU.
Yeah,
Plus,
it would be interesting to see it.
Plus, I
mind you.
mean, when we had expandable RAM on cards, that was when we had bare cards, and now they're all covered in giant heat sinks. So you never even get to see the PCB anymore, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it would be a really cute feature, and we are seeing situations where hackers are actually desoldering memory ICs and replacing them with double capacity ones, doubling the memory of like RTX 3070. But it is just kind of like a teaser of what could be.
That's my favorite part about the original Xbox modding scene, is how people started like soldering in new RAM chips into the Xbox to increase it up to 128 megabytes of RAM from 64. And that
Did
actually
it do anything?
Yeah, it allows you to run Sega's arcade games that use the Chihiro board, which is Xbox based.
Okay.
And it also allows mods, like you can run Doom 3 Xbox version at like 720p with that
That's
mod.
insane.
And there's other things
Yeah.
like that where you can basically do a few more things if you have that expanded memory, which is just radical.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next question. This one from TDS Matt. Assuming for a moment there is a PS5 Pro coming in late 2024 with a roughly 4-year development time, that would mean active development started in 2020 as PS5s were impossible to locate and 30 series GPUs were selling for way over MSRP. Could the PS5 Pro be designed to test that premium console gamers are willing to pay for the best, i.e. something like a $1,000 MSRP?
You know why I'm laughing, Rich, because
it's a ridiculous conceit, really.
I'm
The
thinking
whole
of
point
C
of it-
Wizzy, because he only wants the best. He'd be there with $1,000, no problem. That ain't the Chad Ward.
Well, yeah. I mean, Tom, would you buy a $1,000 PlayStation 5 Pro?
I was thinking about how I probably would.
Really?
I think I probably, in the same, if I had like a lot of disposable income, in the same vein as people might buy the Apple's new VR Pro headset, like just to be there on like just to see what's happening just as it's coming out, be on the cutting edge. There's a certain thrill to that, and it's a very niche, like 1% sort of type user. But I think there is an argument for how, in the same way Apple's doing what they're doing with like a $3,000 headset, it's allowing developers to test things and trial things out in kind of that space. I suppose they've already got PC to do that, but it's I don't know. I'd be tempted, but I also think it's ludicrous from a marketing perspective in an industry where the existing vanilla console's struggling, and I kind of. Yeah, I'd feel a little shortchanged personally, having spent money on this PS5 and not gotten quite the experience I've expected out of it yet. So that's the bottom line. Let's not run before we can walk.
Well, John, I've just inputted $600 into an inflation calculator.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Chad was quite happy to pay $599 for the triple back in 2006. In today's money, that's $903. So an $899 price point.
Yep.
I reckon they could get away with it at $799 if it was actually a super powerful PlayStation 5 that just solved performance problems. The issue there is, I think, twofold. First of all, the concept of an $800 or $900 console is like staggering and is not going to go down well.
Shades of the 3DO.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this could be an opportunity if they did it to push for RT features. I think that's one of the big things left on the cards. I don't think 8K is really what they've gone for. So,
well, there is still this whole notion that 8K is on the box of every PlayStation 5 that's out there, and there's no 8K features on the PlayStation 5 whatsoever. What's going on there? I mean, it was weird when we first saw it on the box in 2020, but it still seems to be there for some reason. It's absolutely baffling.
But what would they do to market it, distinguish it from the existing SKU?
That's the other question, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you're talking about a machine that's for an ultra-low niche. And, developing a console, I'm not exaggerating here. You're looking at a minimum $100 million to make that happen in R&D costs. So, unless this was built into the plan from day one and it was built as a kind of expansion of the existing chip, I just don't think it's viable. Maybe there's something else we're missing.
Because it's certainly not to support PSVR 2, because I don't know what's going on with that right now in terms of support.
Yes, it's all very weird. I think the other thing that maybe TDS Matt needs to appreciate is that people were not happy buying PlayStation 5 and 30 series GPUs for way over MSRP.
No.
It's not, I guess in one way you could see it as a way of figuring out what the market will bear. But at the same time, we've got to appreciate that we're in the middle of a global pandemic. You weren't allowed out of your house effectively. And what could you do when you were in the house? Well, you could play games and you could spend the money to play games. So, yeah, I mean, still kind of curious about this whole PS5 Pro thing, what the spec would be, how much it would cost if it's going to come out. We know effectively at this point there's not going to be an Xbox, and maybe that's for the best. Let's have a new question. This one from Exis. Hey DF! Regarding what Rich said lately about capping frame rates in CPU limited scenarios resulting in a better experience, I was wondering if it might be possible to have some kind of auto capping feature that just caps a VRR display to the lowest stable frame rate achieved in the most recent few seconds, similar to what streaming platforms do with adaptive bitrate. For example, wild variations from 60 to 90 FPS result in a frame rate cap of 60 FPS for some time. I've seen something reminiscent on Oculus software, where if the FPS falls slightly below 90 Hz, it will lock to 45 Hz and interpolate frames until it seems convinced that conditions are improved, that have improved, and then I presume it's going to go back to 90. Interesting conceit, right, John? I kind of like the idea of frame gen being used to sustain a consistent performance level. I'm not sure if this auto capping feature would work. Switching between 60 and 90 is quite a perceptive change that would be difficult to
That's the problem.
paper over.
It's like, how can you do this without interrupting the frame time graph significantly? And I feel like maybe not, or at least it would be pretty darn difficult, especially in the variable world of PC gaming, where there's so many potential fail points for fluidity. But I don't know. I mean, do either of you guys ever really trust anything that's like automatic on the PC side? Like automatic optimization and all this kind of stuff. I feel like that never, like, it can work to some degree, but I still never feel completely satisfied with the results.
Yeah, it never turns out exactly as you did imagine. I have no faith when it comes to use automatic settings for my GPU.
I think the problem I have with this is that you can have, occasional spikes beneath ideal target frame rate, right? And they are fleeting. They're, imperceptible to some people. And I'd be worried that those would affect the auto capping algorithm. It's an interesting conceit, but ultimately, I'm not sure it would work.
I feel like if you have a VR display, if you just set a limit to the ceiling, you're fine, right? You just manually set, like, I don't want frames over this amount, and just go.
Yeah, I think that's the way forward. And typically it happens already because, if you're running G-Sync, you should be setting the V-Sync on at the system level in order to ensure that you don't go above that frame rate.
Exactly.
Simply to eliminate tearing completely. Yeah, interesting point. I think there might be something to it, but it would require quite a lot of research and development. But anyway, let's move on to the next question. This one from Uncomfortable Username. Happy Spartan Direct! Since this is the 117th Direct, I wanted to ask you all some Halo-themed questions. Of all the Halo games you've played, which one is your favorite? Which one do you find the most technically impressive for the time? And did any of you ever get to demo or view the cancelled Halo game made for the DS?
Oh, man.
Thank you for all the fantastic weekly episodes. I'll quickly answer this one. Favorite, probably Combat Evolved, just for the impact it made. But, I loved Halo 3 and I loved Reach. And Halo 4, I think, was for its time, really, really impressive from a technological perspective. I was just kind of blown away at what they were achieving from the Xbox 360 so late on in its life cycle. I didn't get to demo the cancelled Halo game for the DS.
No.
Yeah, John?
Oh man, for me, I also have to go with Combat Evolved, mainly because I think that is one of the games I've probably played the most in my entire life. I spent like basically all 4 years of university playing Halo. I played through the campaign many, many times in many different configurations. It was one of the few games where I played multiplayer in that for years. Lots of dorm room action. I mean, we would have all kinds of like big events, 16 player, 4 Xboxes networked together, all with their own. We would actually use like the big hall at the university campus to like, we had 4 projectors on very large screens. We'd have VCRs hooked up to record the action as well on some of the units. 4-player split screen, 4 systems networked together. We played so much Halo. There's so many strategies to it. The game had a lot of balance issues, which ended up being like a fantastic thing.
Oh, for sure. The pistol.
You could find so many interesting ways to mess with the game balance, and you'd find ways to compensate, and figuring out how to compensate for those was a lot of the fun. I feel like ultra balanced gaming is actually less enjoyable in many ways. Some of those CTF matches are like where we would like wedge vehicles into the bases on some of those, just finding little tricks and slowly uncovering things like dropping from a high place. If you land on an overshield, you would not die. And if you knew the places where those overshields were, you could like basically run for it. Somebody might chase you, you jump off, land on the overshield, but then they fall next to you and die. Just lots of all the combos with the weapons and learning like, all right, if somebody's in like a ghost, you pull out an energy weapon, and try to get behind them, they won't be able to turn as quickly. So you basically kill them easily with that because energy affected the turn rate of the analog stick. Just so many strategies, networking that stuff with the, I don't remember, it was like XB Connect. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
We were doing like early internet stuff with Halo. It all felt very pirate in a way, but it was really fun. And just, I think the campaign, despite some repetition, there was this sense of wonder that really surprised me. Like the reveal of the flood for the first time, I didn't know that was coming. And anybody that played it for the first time back then, that was so expertly crafted. Like you just couldn't imagine that a game would suddenly change so drastically in the second half. Like a completely unforeseen enemy coming out of nowhere. Just an amazing game. I could talk about that all day. I love Halo 1. But I love most of the series as well. I think on the technical side though, oh man, Halo,
it's tricky.
Yeah, because Bungie's games had a lot of technology going on, but I didn't find any of them like mind-blowingly impressive, and they all had a lot of flaws as well. Right? Mm-hmm. So Halo 4 maybe is up there as one of the best, I would say. Given its time frame, Halo 4 is probably the best. Halo 5 is also pretty impressive, given that it's like a locked 60 FPS across the board, and it looks pretty good. Those
amazing 1X version.
Halo Infinite, on the other hand, is quite a disappointment. I think it's pretty poor technically in a lot of ways, and it did not live up to expectations at all on the visual side. But it still plays really well. But yeah, and sadly, I also did not get to see the Halo DS demo. That would have been cool. But
Tom.
Yeah, I mean, no DS access here either. Sadly, I wish that would have been a bit of a reveal, wouldn't it? Yeah, I have it. That's good.
Yeah, you'd have to take the DS out of a jacket pocket, like, the execs did back in the day.
But no, Halo, right there with you, John. LAN parties at my house, quite often actually. We even jerry-rigged up we had 3 Xboxes at my place with a chunky LAN adapter, and we put the 4th one on Xbox Connect to try and connect to someone online. And I always remember because there was like text chat as well with whoever you linked up with, because we had it connected to the PC, and we'd have this 4th Xbox coming from online somewhere with Combat Evolved. And it was like, man, and they were always really confused. Like, how have you got like 12 players on your side, and we've got like maybe 2 or 3 on their side. Great times, and it felt, just as you say, a bit like we were, pushing through to something that we weren't really meant to have access to yet, and that come to fruition with Halo 2, obviously. Halo 2, I'm not going to go through all of them, but Halo 2 was a second favorite, but I think I felt something was lost with the move away from LAN. I loved Halo 2. Incredible, momentous release, but it was also like I enjoyed having my mates over for a good session. And so technically, Halo 4 blew me away, but I didn't get into it as much as the others. The story in Combat Evolved was the one that blew me away. Assault in the Control Room was like a mission I replayed over and over from Combat Evolved to get like all the skulls. So yeah, there's great memories of one.
There's something about 343's campaign design that just never really resonated with me in the same way as Bungie's games. Right? Do you guys agree? Like there's something missing there. They never quite got right. They play well, but it's not Halo in that traditional sense.
Yeah, it's tricky.
I don't know I can't put my finger on it, but yeah, I think you're right there.
But the irony is, of course, John, that we want more Halo Infinite campaign content.
At this point, I don't want just more content. I want a new game I'd like them to build on their gameplay foundations of Halo Infinite, but create something, I don't know, that surprises and delights again, because Infinite did not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's move on to the final question. This one's from Kerry M. Hey team, ! How exciting is it that Todd Howard called out your excellent work on the kind of funny Xcast? And the quote here from Todd: Digital Foundry, they do an incredible job. I don't think they know how everybody in the games industry watches every single one of their videos. They do a fantastic job. I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, we're kind of aware that there is an audience in the game development community, and there's also a lot of dialogue behind the scenes that the audience probably aren't aware of. And there is a kind of mutual respect thing that's generally goes on in those interactions. Public stuff like this doesn't really happen that much. I just think it's kind of like, how can I say it? There's a sort of public perception that's very much geared in a very different atmosphere that's defined by social media, whereas behind the scenes it's completely different and a lot more respectful in both directions. Well, what do you think about this, John?
I'm always flattered and kind of surprised, absolutely. I guess, but it's good. It's good to know it. It keeps us wanting to create cool stuff and interesting stuff, and that kind of thing. Maybe it opens the door to some kind of behind the scenes stuff in the future. Who knows? I would love that.
Yeah, Todd, come on the direct.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get him on here.
That would be fantastic. Tom, thoughts on this?
No, but it's very flattering, and also, it just goes to show. I don't go on Twitter very much because I find the atmosphere there is very different, as you say, to the exchanges I have with people in real life, mainly at conventions.
Like developer visits, that kind of thing.
Wait, when was the last convention you went to, though?
WASD or WASD in London. Some very, got a few people who noticed and said hi, and it was very cool, very lovely to see. And but obviously outside the gaming sphere, like we're kind of invisible. It's a nice thing to know that when people come up to you, you're talking to your people, and so it's very nice to hear that comment as well.
Yeah, it was fantastic to see that, and it was I just kind of was blown away, really. But wow, I think that's it. I think that's all we've got for this show. And if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. Notification update: I'm still only receiving notifications from my own channel, and it's about 24, 48 hours after the content actually posts. So by all means, ring the bell, but who knows what's going to happen, right? DF Supporter Program. Get involved, become part of our amazing community, amazing stuff going on there, great discussions, tons of early access opportunities, a lot of bonus material that you can take a look at. And yes, you can help shape this very show. And of course, there's weekly early access to the show as well. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching.